Oldham, the Share Foundation, the Share Centre and Share Radio. This is really, really interesting stuff. Thank you very much for these. But it strikes me that one of the reasons why, in spite of the fact financial education became compulsory some 4 years ago, we've had very little progress in schools, is because there are no exams to test it. I've analysed GCSEs. There is no financial awareness GCSE. The A-level results show a real steer towards academic subjects rather than life skills. And although there will be a T-level coming in 2021 in finance, that's another 4 years on from here. Would it not make sense to press hard for having a financial awareness GCSE?
Kirsty, do you want to take that one?
I think that's quite a complex thing to address. So the first thing I would say is education has devolved. And in Wales, they do have a new maths GCSE, which tests those real-life practical skills. And that's something we're watching quite closely to see how effective that is. There's creating the test itself, but there's also finding time to have it in the timetable for schools. There's also training the teachers as well. So it's not just, let's create a GCSE. We need to do all those things and then persuade teachers, if that GCSE isn't mandatory, why they should do it. One of the things that we're doing in schools is we're trying to make the business case for why financial education is important. So we are doing a joint project with Young Enterprise and the Education Endowment Foundation to test whether you teach maths in a different way at GCSE level, real life way. Does that both improve educational attainment and also improve financial capability? So that's already started. It's being rolled out to 120 schools at the moment, and it's going to be tested over the next couple of years.
Jonquil, Lowe, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I mean, actually, Kirsty, in your talk, you touched on this really by saying that maybe we should be questioning the content of education. If you look at the
because you know what teachers are going to say? They're going to say, look, yeah, we understand it's all marvellous, but what do you want us to take out of the national curriculum in order to put this in? It's very easy for us to sit round here saying what we think would produce better outcomes, but there is a real problem here.
Training 16 to 18-year-olds who are about to enter this world of finance and having to deal with tax and income and budgeting and saving seems entirely sensible to me. I'm far more sceptical about whether teaching financial education per se to younger children necessarily works. And certainly there have now been 3 meta-analyses, big studies of trying to evaluate financial interventions. And financial education, to be frank, doesn't come out well. There may be a positive effect, but it's tiny. And so I think the jury is still out on whether financial education actually is the content that we need in schools. There are other skills, more generically, that may be preparing our youngsters for their later life.
Maybe we should be doing it a different way. What about sending more people from financial organisations into schools? Martin Upton.
Well, I guess that's a possibility to an extent. I mean, that's already happening. People, certain numbers of people are giving up their time and going into local schools. There's also good work being done by other organisations like My Bank for younger children and by Young Enterprise as well. But going back to your original point about whether there should be an examination, I think the curriculum's too full basically to have yet another GCSE. But with Managing My Money for Young Adults, if you want the certificate, then you have to complete the quizzes and do satisfactory in them. So it's not a GCSE, but it is a piece of assessment.
The thing is, when most of us adults are told that we have to do a course by a certain date, we kind of groan, whereas kids actually love filling in these things. So we need to get them young, I think. Just before we take our next question, can I just go back to Dr. Gavan Conlon? Just playing devil's advocate here, some of your findings at the beginning. Weren't you really just saying that happier, better adjusted people grow up to make better financial decisions? I mean, is that a revelation?
I mean, we're not really saying that in terms of financial education. I mean, we in the full report, we do look at the impact of financial education controlling for these other characteristics. We do find that there is a preventative effect of financial education on adult financial outcomes. So we think that there's a small positive effect of financial education. But there is an issue in the wider economy that schools' budgets are being decimated, essentially. There is no money to teach new courses, new GCSEs. The breadth of the curricula is declining as we speak. So unless something like financial education is very targeted and is wrapped into an existing GCSE, there will be no ability of secondary schools or primary schools, which may be equally as important, to teach the material.
Okay, question at the back here.
From Royal London. Gavin, on your saves regularly into a pension variable,
Yep.
it's all pre-auto enrolment based on the age of your sample. But presumably saving regularly into a pension either meant you worked in the public sector, because everybody in the public sector is in a pension pretty much, or you ended up working for a big firm at a reasonably senior level. So does that actually tell you anything about attitudes to savings and pensions? Isn't it just which firm or which sort of employment you ended up with?
Well, in the analysis, we do try and control for the firm-level characteristics and the nature of employment that the individual has in adulthood. So we try and strip out some of the public sector effect or the large firm effect. And we're left with, having control for these characteristics, there is an impact of cognitive skills, non-cog and behavioural skills on adult-level outcomes in terms of pension savings. So we try and control as much as we can. There's always unobservables. We are talking about a period of time back in the, when these individuals were reaching adulthood. We're talking about 1988. So it's a long time ago. And that is one issue with the analysis. But what we're trying to do, or what we'd hope to do, is actually replicate the analysis using the Millennium Cohort study, which is individuals born in 2000 who are literally at the point of reaching adulthood. And then it would be interesting to compare the outcomes over time over those two cohorts.
Right, let's just ask you, Steve. I mean, you've had a spell in government. Do you think policymakers understand all this?
I wanted to cheer when Jonquil said, I'm not sure about all this financial education. I mean, I know it's heresy, but I'm profoundly unconvinced.
It's all right, Steve. You can say what you like now.
But I do think, some of the behavioural stuff we're hearing about, we'll hear more. What does auto-enrolment tell us? We tried for years to engage people, to educate people, to send them on courses. None of it made a blind bit of difference. Just sorting out, aspects of the environment in which they make choices made all the difference. So I think we could get far more bang for our buck focusing on that than on, more courses, more exams.
Jeanette, any thoughts about this?
I read a very interesting, just on that point actually, Steve, I read a very interesting case study it was published last week in the news about Nationwide, who took exactly that approach, which was actually intervention. Did you read it? But they basically said that instead of giving people the option to increase their pension contribution rate, the rate that they required was 4%, they decided to deduct 7% from everybody's wages and then let people opt out. And surprise, surprise, 85% of them stayed in. So, I think there's a role for all of that. But again, is that the move back from employers becoming the decision makers, employers becoming more paternalistic, etc. So I think they can work in conjunction with one another. I think to stand here and say education isn't a good thing is heresy, whether it's financial education or not. I think giving the power to the people has to be some of the answer.